Are you in your early 60s and often wonder when you could possibly retire? And if so, how much you could potentially spend in retirement? Today, we're going to review a financial plan for a client, Frank and Anna. Of course, names have been changed for presentation purposes, but we're going to see if Frank and Anna can hit all of their goals in life if they retire at a certain age. So they're right around 62 years old and they have about 2.2 million in assets. So let's go ahead and jump into this financial plan and see if Frank and Anna can do everything that they want to do. So here are their assets. And Anna has about $350,000 in her 401k at work, and she's saving about $37,000 a year. So that includes a 4% match and the maximum contribution that she could make being over 50 years old. So that includes her catch up. In their joint account, they're saving $25,000 a year. And then Frank has a Roth IRA with $300,000 in it, and he also has a traditional IRA with about 450,000. So now that we know what kind of assets that they have to work with in retirement, let's take a look at what kind of Social Security they can expect when they reach their full retirement age or beyond. So, Frank, if he were to file a normal application at age 70, he should expect to receive $56,500 a year. Now, we're saying age 70 because Anna also has a working history. So she can file at full retirement age and get 14,400 a year. So when two spouses are close in age and they both have a working history, it allows them to sort of mix and match with their Social Security strategy. So since Frank is a higher income earning spouse and they're close in age, he can wait until 70 and Anna can file at her full retirement age and get some benefit for a couple of years. And then when Frank files for his Social Security benefit, Anna's benefit will jump up to what's called her spousal benefit, which is half of whatever Frank's benefit would have been at full retirement age, otherwise known as his primary insurance amount. So let's take a look at how this strategy works. So Anna would start taking at her full retirement age. She would get roughly $16,000 a year. That was that $14,000 number we saw before with some type of cost of living adjustment for a couple of years. So she would get that benefit for a couple of years. And then when Frank turned 70, he would file. And when he files, Anna's benefit would jump up to her spousal benefit because that's a higher benefit. Now, when Anna filed, because Frank hadn't filed yet, she can't get her spousal benefit yet. But once he files, then she is eligible for her spousal benefit. And one of the reasons why we think that this is a good strategy is because Frank doesn't think he's going to live past 85. And Anna has longevity in her family, and she thinks she's going to live until 90. So, since they're the same age, by Frank waiting until age 70 and locking in that higher benefit with the delayed retirement credits, when he passes away at age 85, and here's him passing away at age 85, Anna's benefit will jump up to whatever his benefit was at the time of his passing. So here you could see Anna's benefit goes away and her benefit jumps up to her survivor benefit. And a survivor benefit is going to be 100% of the benefit, the higher benefit between the two spouses. So in this case, Anna's benefit jumps up to whatever Frank's benefit was at the time of his passing. So now let's look at what Frank and Anna's goals are. Whenever we look at financial planning and we help people determine what their goals are, we always want to understand what that ideal future looks like, right? So how much do you want to spend in retirement? What does that ideally look like to you? How much do you want to spend for gifting to your children or providing care for a loved one or helping your grandchild or child with a down payment on their first home? So let's understand what that looks like. And then let's work backwards because all of that information all plays into how much money do you need to save today? How much could you spend today? And then how much could you spend in retirement? So the first thing that we talked to Frank and Anna about is when would they like to have the freedom to retire? So we asked them when they would like to have the freedom to retire because they might not know exactly when they would like to retire. Many times people say, well, I'm willing to work until I'm 70. Well, you might be willing to work until you're 70, but when would you like to have the freedom to retire? So Frank and Anna said they would like to have the freedom to retire at age 65. And they said they weren't actually sure when they could retire. And so that's always the number that they had in their mind because that's when Medicare kicks in. So we'll look at a little bit later what the cost of private insurance would be if they were to retire earlier. But as a base case, we started with age 65 and they said they wanted to spend about $78,000 a year. Now, when Medicare kicks in, they're going to be paying about $10,000 a year in Medicare. And let's take a look at what the overall expenses would be because they're not going to have private insurance, right? They're not going to have a bunch of out of pocket prior to Medicare because they're retiring at 65. But they're going to have a Medicare Part B assumption, a Medicare Part D, and then they're going to have a Medigap or Medicare supplemental, and then they're going to have some out-of-pocket expenses. So for Frank, we're estimating about $5,400 a year. And then if you add that to Anna's expenses as well, it comes out to about $10,700 a year. So Anna's comes out to $5,300. So Frank and Anna both love to travel, and that's really one of the things that is driving them to look into this decision as to how long do they really need to keep working, because they want to spend about $30,000 a year in travel. And they assume that if they retire at age 65, that they'll travel for about 15 years at that level. And that's a couple of big trips a year. So we assume that they're going to spend $30,000 a year for a total of 15 times, and then they'll be right around age 80, and they assume that their travel will slow down at that time. So they also want to cover a wedding for one of their children. So their daughter is in a serious relationship and maybe getting married soon, and as they start planning for retirement, they don't want to say I'm going to prioritize my retirement and just forget about my daughter's wedding. They want to make sure that they're going to be able to take care of the cost for their daughter's wedding. And they assume that it's going to cost around $50,000. And what they said was they want to plan for $50,000 and that's what they're going to offer their daughter. And if their daughter wants to spend less than that, then that's fine. They could spend $10,000 and keep 40,000. But in their mind, it's very important to them that they offer at least $50,000 for their daughter's marriage, and maybe she uses it as a down payment on a first home. But that $50,000 is the number that they felt comfortable giving to their daughter at the time of her wedding. So they also wanted to make sure that they had enough money to provide for the potential care of Frank's father. So Frank's father is older and he's okay right now, but Frank said he really wants to make sure that he has enough money set aside in the event that his father needs it. So he knows his father has some money set aside, but he's not exactly sure how much, and it's not a conversation that his father is willing to have with him. And so he wants to make sure that he puts at least $50,000 a year away for about 3 years. So typically, if a male goes into long-term care, the estimated time of a long-term care event is right around 2 to 3 years. And for a female, it's closer to 5 years. So we estimated 3 years at $50,000. And then Frank and Anna wanted to make sure that they covered the cost of a car. So they're fairly frugal. They don't buy cars every 3 years. They don't lease cars. They pay cash outright for them. And it's something that's always been very important that they do and not have that debt hanging over them. And so they wanted a budget about $40,000, and that's net of trade-in cost. So with all of these goals in mind, let's take a look at what their total cash flow is going to look like in retirement and how much money they might have left over at the end of their lives. So here's all of their goals and what they need to fund it each year in retirement. So this dotted line is their essential goals, right? So that's going to be their basic living expenses, inflation adjusted, as well as all of their other expenses. So care for Frank's father. We've got weddings. We've got elevated expenses for travel for a number of years that drops off when they turn age 80, and then of course the car purchases every 10 years. So how are we going to fund all of this? So portfolio withdrawals are going to be elevated earlier on in retirement. right? Because Social Security hasn't kicked in yet at that time. So portfolio withdrawals are higher, and then Social Security is going to kick in. So Social Security is going to kick in 2030, and then it's going to go up even more when Frank starts taking his benefit and Anna switches to her spousal benefit. So that's going to be a big bump in their overall retirement income, and their portfolio withdrawals are going to be able to decrease at that time. And then when they reach age 73, they're going to have what's called required minimum distributions. So, required minimum distributions are the minimum amount that somebody has to pull out of their traditional IRA, not their Roth IRA, but their traditional IRA every year after the age of 73. So, required minimum distributions will kick in at age 73 in 2038. And that will also make up a big portion of their overall required living expenses in retirement. Now, as you can see, the required minimum distributions are more than they actually need to live in retirement. And that is a scenario where maybe Roth conversions early on in life might be a good idea. So, especially if they retire at age 65 or 63, doing some Roth conversions in order to get this amount down below what they actually need to live in retirement is a good way to control taxes in retirement. And the reason why is because everything that goes over what they actually need to live is just going to be additional income that they're going to have to realize and pay taxes on that they otherwise wouldn't have to if they executed systematic Roth conversions after they retired. So we know from looking at the cash flow that Frank and Anna are going to be okay, right? With retiring at 65, they should have no problem funding all of their goals in life. But let's take a look at what that means from a Monte Carlo simulation standpoint. So Monte Carlo simulation takes 1,000 different possibilities of what could happen over their lifetime and gives us a probability of success. So it assumes some good markets and it assumes some bad markets, and ultimately it gives us a probability of Frank and Anna hitting their goals. So if we were to run 1,000 different possibilities over their lifetime, we get a 95% probability of hitting their goals. So what does that mean? That means that out of 1,000 different trials, 50 trials ran out of money. That's these red lines down here. And 950 trials did not run out of money. Now, when we see a scenario like that, we wonder, okay, do we want to be the richest guy in the graveyard, right? Most people say, I just want to bounce my last check. But do you want to go the other way and be the richest guy in the graveyard? With Monte Carlo simulation, we typically want to see somebody in the green zone. And the reason why is because if we're in the blue zone, it means that the probability is too high. Frank and Anna said that they're not sure when they could retire. So they just picked 65 out of a hat. But really, they would really like to retire as soon as possible. And ideally, they would retire tomorrow if they could. So when I see that in the blue zone, that means that they have some flexibility, right? They could retire earlier, they could spend more money, they could save less today, or a combination of all the above, or even they could take less risk in their portfolio. So here's the projection of their assets if they were to retire at age 65. And we're making a conservative assumption of a return of right around 5.2% over their life at an average return. Now, if they start with 2.2 million, we could see they have addition to assets in the first couple of years. That's their savings. We could see the wedding in 2026. We also have providing care as well as the purchase, and these numbers are all inflation adjusted. We could see the purchase of a new car every 10 years. And ultimately, their portfolio value ends right around $3.9 million. Now let's see what would happen and what type of flexibility they have to reach some other goals, right? What if they don't want to be the richest guy in the graveyard and they say, what can I do with my portfolio, assuming that I don't want to have a 99% probability of success, right? I'm comfortable with it with 85, right? Because that means that the probability is not too high. It's not too high that I'm sacrificing something today for tomorrow, but it's not too low, meaning I'm sacrificing something tomorrow for today. So let's look at all the possibilities, right? There's a lot of different goals and a lot of different priorities. And for them, they have retirement living expenses of $78,000 a year with a 94% probability of success. So, what if we were to spend $100,000 a year? What would that mean for their retirement? And they still have a high probability of success. But they say, you know what? I don't know what to do with $100,000 a year. I really only need $78,000 a year. And that is what makes me feel comfortable, right? So in retirement planning and financial planning, it's always important that we really look at what does your ideal future look like, right? What does that ideal retirement look like? And then let's work backwards to figure out what we need to do today. What do we need to do today? How do we need to invest that money? What does your saving strategy look like? What does your investment strategy look like in order to hit your goals in the future? So $100,000 really isn't important to them. That's not really what they want to do. So let's move that back down to 78,000 and let's look at travel. What if they were to spend $60,000 a year in travel? What does that mean? And they still have an 81% probability of success. But they said to me, they said, Zach, I really don't know if we could spend that much more in travel. I think 3 big trips a year is more than enough than we need for travel. And so ultimately, we said, well, what if you retire earlier, right? What if you don't wait until 65? What if you retire next year? And we do away with a couple of years of savings and we say, let's just retire next year. So retiring 2 years earlier, their portfolio still has some resiliency throughout their life. Here's their taxable assets. Here's their qualified assets, which is the IRA, and of course they have some Roth assets, and they don't run out of money by the end of their lives. So one of the things that Frank and Anna were really concerned about with retiring any earlier was healthcare, right? They just said, I don't know what to expect because, once I reach age 65, Medicare kicks in and it's an easy number to just pick out of a hat because we don't know what to expect. Well, let's look at what healthcare would look like in the event that they did retire early. And this shows the resiliency of all of their savings because they are able to weather the higher annual healthcare expenses. So if they both retire at 2026, Frank is going to have 12,800 roughly is what we're estimating for private insurance prior to Medicare. Plus he's going to have some more out-of-pocket expenses for a total of 17,299. Now, Anna is also going to have about 12,819 in private insurance, some out-of-pocket expenses prior to Medicare for a total of 17,370. So their total annual healthcare expenses is going to be close to $35,000 a year the first year, and then we inflate healthcare at a higher rate. So in that second year, we're assuming that it's going to be 37,000, and then it drops off. So you could see in this chart the higher annual expenses for each of them in that first 2 years, and then it drops off significantly when Medicare kicks in. Thank you for joining for this video today, and I hope you're able to find some parallels among your own situation. And when you look back at Frank and Anna, maybe for you it's not providing care, maybe for you it's not a wedding, but it's some other type of expense that you could replace in this financial plan and make it applicable to you. Thank you.